You walk on ground older than memory. Beneath your feet, in coal seams pressed for hundreds of millions of years, scientists have pulled out objects that look machined. Tonight, we descend into pyramids that hum with heat, ancient reactors that ran before humans existed, and skulls that match no creature alive. If wonders like these keep you up at night, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Something was here before us, and the strangest part, it never really left. Prepare yourself. We begin. Picture a single day, 24 hours, from midnight to midnight. Now imagine that one day represents the entire history of our planet. Earth forms at the stroke of midnight. The sun rises, continents drift, oceans boil and cool. Strange creatures crawl from the sea, dinosaurs rule for what feels like an eternity. And then, finally, at 3 seconds before the next midnight, humans appear. 3 seconds. That is how recent we are. Out of 4.5 billion years, modern humans have existed for roughly 200,000. Civilization, with cities and writing and tools, barely 6,000. Compared to the age of the ground beneath your shoes, we are a flicker, a spark in a dark room. But here is where the story gets unsettling. For most of that 24-hour day, something was happening on Earth. The planet was not empty. It was alive, evolving, transforming, building, and tearing itself apart over and over again. Mountains rose and crumbled into dust. Entire oceans dried up. Whole species lived for millions of years, ruled the planet, and then vanished without a single human ever seeing them. So the obvious question becomes, what was here before us? And more importantly, what did they leave behind? When archaeologists dig into the Earth, they expect a clean timeline, old layers on the bottom, younger layers on top, simple, predictable. But every so often, someone pulls something out of the ground that does not belong. A piece of metal too refined for its age, a shaped stone in a place no human ever walked, a pattern carved into rock that should be billions of years older than the carvers. These objects are sometimes called out-of-place artifacts. Scientists usually have explanations. A trick of geology, a misidentified object, a modern contamination. And many times, those explanations are correct, but not always. There are cases where the explanations fall apart. Cases where the object is too precise, too deliberate, and the rock around it is too undisturbed. Cases where serious researchers, with reputations on the line, admit they have no answer at all. Imagine you walked into your house, opened a sealed cabinet that had been locked for 100 years, and found a smartphone inside. You would not say it was a coincidence. You would say something is deeply wrong with your understanding of the timeline. That is what some of these discoveries feel like to the people who find them. The mainstream story of humanity is clean and simple. We came down from the trees, we learned to use fire, we invented farming, we built cities. Each step took thousands of years. Each tool was slightly better than the last. A neat staircase of progress climbing upward toward us, but the Earth keeps coughing up things that do not fit on that staircase. Objects that seem to skip steps. Sites that appear too advanced, too old, or too aligned with knowledge their builders should not have had. And in the next chapter, we begin with one of the strangest. A discovery pulled from coal so old that no human, no matter how clever, should have been anywhere near it. It was not supposed to be there. And yet, there it was. Coal is patience turned into stone. It begins as forests. Swamps full of giant ferns and ancient trees that lived hundreds of millions of years ago, long before any mammal existed. Those forests fell, sank into mud, and were buried under unimaginable weight. Slowly, over time, we cannot even feel the plant matter cooked and compressed into black rock. That rock is older than dinosaurs, older than birds, older than nearly every creature you have ever heard of. So when a coal miner cracks open a fresh seam with his pickaxe, he expects ancient leaves, Maybe a fossilized fern, perhaps the outline of a primitive insect. He does not expect to find something man-made staring back at him. And yet, that has happened. More than once. In the 1800s, in a small town in Illinois, a woman named Mrs. S. W. Culp was breaking up a lump of coal for her stove. The lump split in half, and something fell out. A gold chain. Fine. Delicate, 8 inches long, with both ends still embedded in the broken pieces of coal. Local newspapers reported the story. The chain was real. It was examined. It was held up to the light. The coal it came from was estimated to be around 300 million years old. 300 million. For comparison, the very first dinosaurs would not appear for another 60 million years after that coal was already laid down. There were no humans, no mammals like us, no species capable of melting gold into thin links. So how does a gold chain end up inside it? Skeptics offer the usual answers. Maybe Mrs. Culp dropped the chain near the coal pile and only thought it came from inside. Maybe a piece of jewelry fell into a crack and got crusted with coal dust. Maybe the entire story is exaggerated. These are fair concerns, but the Culp chain is far from alone. In 1944, a 10-year-old boy named Newton Anderson dropped a chunk of coal in his basement. It broke open, and inside was a small brass bell, decorated, cast, clearly made by skilled hands. Tests on the metal showed an unusual composition, with traces of elements not typically found in modern brass. A coal miner in Oklahoma reported a small iron pot pressed into the middle of a solid lump. The miner kept it as a curiosity for years. In another case, a clay vessel was reportedly found inside coal in Pennsylvania, complete with carved figures on its surface. Each story, taken alone, sounds like a tall tale, a misunderstanding, a fraud cooked up for attention, and some of them probably are. But the pattern is what makes researchers pause. Across different countries, different decades, different witnesses, the same strange thing keeps appearing. Manufactured objects, sealed inside rock that should be far too old for any human craftsman to have made them. Geologists insist there must be a natural explanation. The objects fell into cracks, the dates of the coal are wrong, the witnesses misremembered. Maybe, probably in most cases. But every so often, the cracks do not line up. The coal seam is unbroken, the object is clearly designed, and no one, not even the experts, can fully explain how it got there. What if these are not mistakes? What if they are messages? Tiny notes from someone or something that lived here long before us? And the next discovery is even harder to explain away. In a quiet valley in South Africa, miners have been digging through ancient rock for generations. The town is called Ottersdal, near a place named Klerksdorp. The rock they are pulling out is a layer called pyrophyllite, a soft mineral used to make ornaments and tabletops. That rock is roughly 2.5 billion years old. 2.5 billion. To put that in perspective, the first single-celled life on Earth was just barely getting started when that rock was forming. There were no fish, no plants, no insects, no bones, just oceans, bare continents, and a sky that looked nothing like the one above you tonight. So when miners began pulling perfect spheres out of that rock, the world had a problem. The objects are small, about the size of a plum. Some are almost flawlessly round. Many of them have 3 deep, parallel grooves carved precisely around their middle, like the rings of a tiny planet. Their surfaces are smooth, polished, and made of a hard metallic substance that resists scratching even with steel. The miners call them cosmic eggs. Hundreds have been found. They sit in private collections, dusty museum drawers, and on the shelves of curious geologists, and no one can fully agree on what they are. The mainstream explanation is that they are concretions, natural lumps of mineral that formed inside the rock over millions of years as water moved through it. Concretions exist. They are real, and many of them are round. But concretions do not usually carve 3 perfect parallel lines around themselves. Researchers who have examined the spheres up close describe a level of symmetry that seems too clean for blind chemistry. Some report that when balanced on a flat surface, the spheres rotate slowly on their own, possibly responding to vibrations or magnetic fields. Locked away in glass cases at one South African museum, certain spheres reportedly turn a tiny amount each day, as if something inside them was still alive with energy. Picture holding one. Cool, dense, heavier than it should be. Smooth as polished steel. Wrap your fingers around it and feel 3 sharp grooves cut into the equator. Now remember that the rock it came out of formed before life on land even existed. The question is unavoidable. Who made it? Some scientists insist no one did. They argue that pressure, heat, and chemistry can mimic almost any shape, given enough time. They point to natural pyrite crystals that grow into perfect cubes, and to limestone formations that look strangely artificial. Other researchers are not convinced. They look at the grooves and see machining. They look at the smoothness and see polishing. They look at the symmetry and see intent. For now, the spheres sit silently, refusing to confess. If they are natural, they are one of the most stunning accidents the planet has ever produced. If they are not, then someone or something was already shaping metal into engineered objects when Earth was still a strange, half-formed world. And whatever the answer turns out to be, it does not stop there. Because in the next chapter, we find evidence that someone or something may have been running a nuclear reactor on this planet, long before any human knew what an atom was. In 1972, a French scientist at a nuclear facility noticed something strange in his samples. He was testing uranium ore that had been shipped in from a mine in Gabon, a country in West Africa. The mine was called Oklo. The ore was being processed to make fuel for nuclear power plants. But the numbers on his instruments did not match. In normal uranium ore, you find a steady ratio between 2 types of uranium atoms. One is heavier and more useful for nuclear reactions. The other is more common. That ratio is almost identical no matter where the ore is dug up. Anywhere on Earth, anywhere in the solar system. The samples from Oklo were short. Some of the powerful uranium was missing. Not a tiny rounding error. Enough to matter. Enough to mean something had used it. At first, panic. Was uranium being stolen and smuggled out of the supply chain? Investigators raced to the mine, expecting to find shady deals and missing crates. What they found instead rewrote the textbooks. Deep inside the rock layers at Oklo, in zones buried under tons of stone, researchers discovered the remains of what could only be described as a natural nuclear reactor. Not a man-made one, not built by any human. A reactor that had switched itself on, billions of years before the first ape stood upright. The setup was almost too perfect. Rich pockets of uranium had gathered in the rock. Water seeped in from above. The water acted as a moderator, slowing the neutrons enough to trigger a chain reaction. The uranium heated up. The water boiled away. The reaction stopped. The rock cooled. Water seeped back in. The cycle restarted. For hundreds of thousands of years, deep beneath the African ground, Oklo pulsed on and off like a slow, steady heartbeat of radiation. Scientists estimate it ran in this rhythm for more than 150,000 years. Then, finally, the uranium burned itself down too far to sustain the reaction. The reactor quietly shut off, sealed itself behind layers of stone, and waited. For roughly 2 billion years, no one knew it was there. Now think about that. The first time humans split the atom was in 1942. In a squash court underneath a football stadium in Chicago. We thought we were doing something brand new. We thought we were the first. We were not. Africa had been doing it on its own, in the dark, for longer than complex life has existed. For most scientists, Oklo is a beautiful coincidence. A perfect alignment of geology and chemistry that proves Earth can be wilder than imagination. It is celebrated as a natural marvel. But a quieter question lingers underneath the celebration. The conditions at Oklo are so unusual, so finely tuned, that nothing like it has ever been found again. Other uranium deposits on Earth, just as rich, just as wet, never lit up. Only Oklo did. Only once. Was it really an accident? Or did something arrange the ingredients just right, then leave the planet alone to see what would happen? And the next ancient marvel does not just hint at lost knowledge. It puts a mechanical computer in the hands of people who, by every accepted timeline, should not have one. In the spring of 1900, a group of sponge divers off the Greek island of Antikythera were thrown off course by a storm. While waiting for the weather to clear, they decided to dive in waters they did not normally fish. About 140 feet down, on a steep underwater cliff, they found a sunken ship. It was old, Roman era old, around 2,000 years old. The divers began bringing up treasures, bronze statues, marble figures, coins, jars, everyday cargo from a ship that had gone down sometime in the 1st century before the Common Era. The wreck made headlines. Then, in the pile of corroded debris, someone noticed a strange green lump of bronze, about the size of a shoebox, crusted with 2,000 years of sea life. It looked like junk. They almost discarded it. When the lump dried out, it cracked open. Inside were gears. Tiny, precise gears locked together in layers. Bronze wheels with carefully cut teeth. Pointers. Dials. Inscriptions in ancient Greek, so small they could barely be read with the naked eye. The world had never seen anything like it from that era, or from any era close to it. For decades, no one knew what it was. The object, now called the Antikythera mechanism, sat in a museum in Athens, slowly studied by frustrated researchers. Some thought it was an early clock, others guessed an astrolabe, a starfinder used by sailors. Most agreed on one thing. Nothing this complex should have existed 2,000 years ago. Then came modern scanning, high-resolution X-rays, computer reconstructions, and slowly the mechanism began to give up its secrets. It is a calculator, a mechanical computer. Inside its small bronze frame are at least 30 interlocking gears, working together to model the heavens. Turn a small handle on the side, and the dials advance. The mechanism tracks the position of the sun and moon across the sky. It predicts solar eclipses. It calculates the phases of the moon. It marks the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. It even appears to model the motions of the visible planets. And it does this with gears so finely cut that for more than 1,000 years afterward, no human invention came close to matching it. After the Antikythera mechanism sank with that Roman ship, the level of precision engineering it required vanished from the human record. The world entered a long stretch of time where clocks were crude, gears were rare, and astronomy was done with little more than wooden tools and patience. Mechanical calculators of comparable complexity would not reappear until well over 1,000 years later. Some historians argue closer to 1,500 years. So one obvious question hangs in the air. If they could build this in ancient Greece, why did no one else seem to have one? Where are the workshops, the blueprints, the other examples? There are no clear answers. Just one strange, lonely device pulled from the sea, hinting that someone in the ancient world had a kind of knowledge that should not have been possible. And yet, knowledge like this is not the only thing the sea hides. Off another coast, on the other side of the world, the ocean has been quietly covering something far older than any Greek shipwreck. Off the southern coast of Japan, near a small island called Yonaguni, divers in the 1980s began noticing strange shapes in the rock under the water. At first, they assumed natural formations. The Pacific is full of underwater cliffs and ledges sculpted by currents, nothing unusual. Then they looked more carefully. About 80 feet below the surface, a massive stone structure rises from the seafloor. Researchers have measured it. It stretches more than 150 feet across. It climbs roughly 90 feet upward, like a stepped pyramid sitting underwater. The faces of its terraces are flat. The edges, in many places, look sharp. Straight angles, right angles, corners where corners should not naturally appear. Divers call it the Yonaguni Monument, and it has split the scientific world in half. One side, including many mainstream geologists, insists that the monument is entirely natural. They argue that the underwater stone here is a type of sandstone that fractures along clean, straight lines. They point to similar features elsewhere on Earth. They say the ocean carved the terraces, the currents polished the surfaces, and the imagination did the rest. The other side, including several respected marine geologists and underwater archaeologists, is not so sure. They point to certain details that natural fracturing rarely produces. Holes drilled into the rock in straight, deliberate lines, almost as if intended to hold posts. Right-angle steps stacked too neatly, a pathway that seems to curve around the structure. Carvings on some faces that look like rough renderings of animals or human figures. A pair of large eye-like cavities that face out into the open water. And then, there is the timing. The Yonaguni Monument sits in water that, until roughly 10,000 years ago, was dry land. Sea levels were lower during the last ice age. Coastal regions all over the world that are now underwater were once exposed to the air. If the monument was carved, it had to be carved before the seas rose. That would place it well over 10,000 years old. For comparison, the Great Pyramids of Egypt are around 4,500 years old. The famous stones of Stonehenge in England are about 5,000. If Yonaguni is human-made, it would be at least twice as old as either of them. That timeline is the real problem. According to the standard story of civilization, no one alive 10,000 years ago should have had the tools, the social organization, or the engineering skill to build something this large in stone. Hunter-gatherers, the textbooks tell us, were busy chasing deer and gathering berries. They were not carving cathedrals into the coast. Some researchers see Yonaguni as proof that the standard timeline is wrong. They suggest there was an advanced culture, lost to history, that built in stone long before anyone thought possible. When the seas rose, their cities drowned. Whatever they knew sank with them. Other researchers warn against jumping to conclusions. They remind us that the human brain loves to find patterns, especially in rocks. A square shadow under murky water can fool even an expert. Both sides keep diving. Both sides keep arguing. But Yonaguni is not the only place where the timeline is bending. On dry land in a hill in southern Turkey, an even older mystery is forcing historians to throw away their textbooks completely. On a dry hillside in southern Turkey, near the border with Syria, archaeologists in the 1990s began digging into what they thought was a simple, medieval burial site. Locals had been finding odd-shaped stones poking out of the ground for years. The site was called Göbekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill. What came out of that hill changed history. Beneath the surface lay massive limestone pillars, each one shaped like a tall capital letter T. Some standing more than 16 feet high, some weighing more than 10 tons. They were arranged in carefully planned circles, like the rings of a stone forest, with smaller pillars surrounding two giant central ones. And listen to the carvings. Foxes leaping along the sides. Wild boars frozen mid-charge, scorpions with their stingers raised, vultures, snakes, lions, and strange humanoid figures with thin arms and wrapped hands carved into the stone. Each pillar a story, each circle a temple. This kind of art and architecture was supposed to belong to a much later era, the age of cities, the age of kings and priests and organized armies, the kind of culture that grew up after farming was invented, when food was plentiful enough that some people could spend their days carving stone instead of finding their next meal. Then the carbon dates came back. Göbekli Tepe is about 11,500 years old. 11,500. That makes it more than 6,000 years older than the Great Pyramids of Egypt. More than 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Older than the wheel. Older than writing. Older than nearly every major invention humans pride themselves on. And here is the part that broke the textbooks. At the time Göbekli Tepe was built, humans were supposed to be wandering hunter-gatherers. Small bands moving from camp to camp, chasing game, sleeping under skins. Farming had not yet been invented. Pottery was not in use. Villages were tiny. Anything beyond a temporary shelter was unheard of. And yet, somehow, these wandering people stopped wandering long enough to quarry stones the size of small buses, drag them across rocky terrain, raise them into the air, decorate them with intricate animal carvings, and arrange them in geometric patterns that suggest astronomical alignment. How? To pull this off, you need more than muscle. You need food, lots of food. Workers must be fed every day for years. You need leadership, planning, division of labor. You need someone who knows mathematics, geometry, perhaps astronomy. You need engineers, even if no one called them that. Almost everything we thought about the dawn of civilization gets flipped at Göbekli Tepe. Mainstream science assumed farming came first, then settlements, then religion, then monuments. The hillside in Turkey suggests the order may be the opposite. Sacred sites first, then farming and cities grew up around them to support the work. Even stranger, the people who built Göbekli Tepe later buried it. Deliberately. They filled it in with dirt and rubble, hiding it for thousands of years. No one knows why. Was it sacred protection? A taboo? A warning? And while one mystery sleeps beneath a Turkish hill, another small object in Iraq tells us that ancient hands may have been holding something even more shocking. Something that should not have been possible until the modern age. In 1936, workers digging near the village of Kujut Rabu, just outside Baghdad, unearthed a small clay jar. It was about 6 inches tall, brown, unremarkable at first glance. The kind of artifact archaeologists clean off, label, and pack away by the hundreds. Then they looked inside. The jar contained a copper cylinder, carefully crafted, fitted snugly into the clay. Inside the copper cylinder sat a thin iron rod, suspended down the middle, held in place by an asphalt plug. The whole thing was sealed. It was a strange design for a religious offering. Strange for a perfume bottle. Strange for storing scrolls. When a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig examined the object a few years later, he proposed something that startled his colleagues. He suggested it was a battery, a working battery, made by hand, possibly 2,000 years old. The idea sounded absurd. Electricity, as we understand it, was supposed to have been mastered by humans only in the last few hundred years. Famous experiments with kites and keys, glowing wires and glass bulbs, the slow march of modern science. The notion that someone in ancient Mesopotamia was already wiring up a power source seemed laughable, but the design was suspicious. If you take a copper tube, place an iron rod inside without letting them touch, fill the gap with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice, and seal it shut, you have built a basic electrochemical cell. It will produce a small but real voltage, enough to feel a faint shock, enough to plate a thin layer of metal onto another object. Modern researchers have built replicas of the Baghdad battery. They filled them with grape vinegar, they attached simple wires, and the jars produced electricity. Not much, only about 1 volt, but real, measurable current. Now the question becomes simple. If you accidentally made a battery, you do not seal it carefully with asphalt. You do not suspend the iron rod with such care. You do not design the cylinder so precisely. The Baghdad battery looks like someone knew what they were doing. So, what did they use it for? One theory points to ancient jewelry. Some pieces from that region show extremely thin layers of gold or silver coating cheaper metals. The plating is so fine that craftsmen using normal methods of the time would have struggled to produce it. With an electric current, however, gold can be deposited onto a surface molecule by molecule. The process, called electroplating, is exactly what such a jar could power. Another theory suggests the jars were used in temples. A worshipper touching a sacred object might feel a sudden tingle, interpreted as the touch of a god. Imagine the awe of a peasant who reached out, brushed a metal statue, and felt energy leap from its skin. A third theory dismisses it all as coincidence. The jar might really be a scroll container, with the iron rod simply a peg, and the modern interpretation is wishful thinking. But the design is hard to ignore. The pieces line up too well. Whatever the truth, the Baghdad battery hints that the line between ancient and modern may not be a clean wall. It may be a fence with strange gaps in it, gaps that someone walked through long ago, leaving small clues behind. And while clues in jars are unsettling, clues in stone are even worse, especially when the stone is older than the species that supposedly left them. In a riverbed in Texas, near a town called Glen Rose, there is a stretch of pale limestone that draws strange visitors. Geologists, paleontologists, religious pilgrims, conspiracy theorists, all of them staring at the same thing in the rock: footprints. The famous ones are dinosaur tracks, three-toed impressions left by giant predators that stalked the area roughly 110 million years ago, when the limestone was soft mud at the edge of an ancient sea. The dinosaur tracks are real. They are well documented. They are studied by serious scientists with no controversy. But mixed in with the dinosaur prints, some claim, are other tracks. Human-shaped tracks. Long, oval impressions. 5 toes. A clearly defined heel. Some show the curve of an arch in the middle. Some appear to overlap with or cross right through the dinosaur trails. If that is true, the implications are enormous. Humans and dinosaurs are not supposed to have existed at the same time. The gap between the last non-bird dinosaurs and the first humans is about 65 million years. That is not a small mistake. That is the entire history of mammals on Earth. So when the first photographs of the Glen Rose tracks appeared in the early 1900s, they caused an uproar. Some people argued the prints proved that the standard timeline of evolution was wrong. Others argued they proved nothing of the kind. Careful examination by paleontologists eventually showed that many of the supposed human prints were misidentified. Some were partial dinosaur tracks where the side toes had not registered, leaving only a vague oval. Some were elongated impressions left by certain dinosaurs walking on the soft heels of their feet. Some were natural erosion patterns, shaped by water and time into accidental resemblances of human steps. A few prints, however, have proven harder to explain. They show clearer toe definition, heel impressions, even what looks like the imprint of an arch. Critics point out that some of the most famous specimens were carved or enhanced for tourist value during hard economic times. Locals admit that fakes were made and sold. That alone has cast a long shadow over the entire site. But here is where the story refuses to die. Other locations around the world have produced similar reports. Footprint-shaped marks in stone supposedly dated tens of millions of years before humans existed. Some in South Africa, some in Central America, some in Russia. Each set comes with its own controversy. Each gets argued over by experts. Most are eventually explained away. Most, not all. A handful of cases remain stubborn. Prints in rock so old and so clearly human in shape that no one has been able to fully account for them. The mainstream answer is that we simply have not yet identified the natural process that made them. Given enough time, science will catch up. The fringe answer is that someone or something with human-shaped feet was walking on this planet long before we were supposed to exist. Both possibilities are uncomfortable in their own way. One forces us to accept that nature can fake humanity with stunning accuracy. The other forces us to accept that our timeline of intelligence on Earth may be hiding entire chapters. And speaking of out-of-place objects, one famous discovery in Texas is heavier, harder, and even stranger than any footprint. It hangs in a small museum to this day, and no one can comfortably explain how it ended up where it was found. In the small town of London, Texas, in 1936, A couple named Max and Emma Hahn were walking near a creek. They noticed a piece of wood sticking out of a chunk of rock at the edge of the water. Curious, they took the rock home, set it on a shelf, and mostly forgot about it. Years later, their son cracked it open with a hammer. Inside was another hammer. The object that came out of the rock is shaped exactly like an old miner's hand tool. A heavy iron head, slightly rounded on one side and flatter on the other. A wooden handle pushed through the eye of the head, perfectly fitted. The whole thing about 6 inches long. The iron rusted. The wood partially turned to coal-like material at one end. It looks ordinary. It looks like something you might find in a barn, except for the rock it came out of. The hammer is now displayed in a small private museum in Texas. The mineral concretion that surrounded it is preserved with the tool. According to the people who own it, the surrounding rock is incredibly old, hundreds of millions of years old. Some claim more than 400 million. If that age is correct, the implications are huge. 400 million years ago, there were no humans, no mammals, no reptiles, no dinosaurs. The continents looked nothing like today. The land was just beginning to be colonized by simple plants. The most advanced creatures on Earth were jawless fish and primitive bugs. Nobody alive then had hands. Nobody had fire. Nobody could forge iron. So how does an iron hammer end up inside that rock? The mainstream answer is that the rock surrounding the hammer is not actually that old. It is a concretion. Concretions are clumps of minerals that form in much shorter time spans, sometimes over decades, sometimes centuries, around objects sitting in groundwater rich in dissolved minerals. The hammer, in this view, was simply dropped near the creek by a miner or carpenter in the 1800s. Over time, mineral-rich water flowed around it, hardened, and slowly built up a thick stone shell. The shell formed quickly enough that the wood inside had no time to fully rot. This is a perfectly reasonable explanation. Concretions like this are well documented. Modern objects, even bottle caps and bullet casings, have been found inside similar mineral clumps. But supporters of the artifact point to several details they find odd. The iron of the hammerhead, when tested in early studies, was reported to have an unusual composition. Very pure iron, with traces of other elements in proportions different from typical industrial 19th century products. The handle inside the rock had partially turned into a coal-like substance, suggesting more time and pressure than a few decades would normally provide. Skeptics counter that the iron analysis was never independently verified to modern standards, and that the coalification of wood can happen quickly under the right local conditions. The truth is, no one has done a full, modern scientific study of the London hammer that everyone can agree on. The owners guard the object. The fringe community insists it proves the timeline is wrong. The mainstream rolls its eyes and moves on. Whatever the final answer, the object exists. It sits, in its case, a heavy reminder that the line between explanation and mystery can sometimes be very thin. And speaking of weight, the next chapter looks at stones so massive that even modern machines struggle to lift them. Yet ancient hands, somehow, move them. In a temple complex called Baalbek, in modern-day Lebanon, 3 colossal blocks of limestone sit silently in a wall. They are part of the foundation of an ancient site that was later expanded by the Romans. The blocks are known as the trilithon. Each one weighs around 800 tons. 800 tons. That is roughly the weight of more than 200 adult elephants stacked together. Each block is around 64 feet long, 14 feet high, and 10 feet wide. They are stacked side by side with such precision that even today, a knife blade cannot be slipped between them. Just down the slope from the temple, half buried in the ground, lies an even larger stone. This one was cut from the same quarry, but never finished its journey. Modern surveys have measured it. It weighs around 1,200 tons, possibly more. It is one of the largest work stones on the planet. Now think about how a stone like that gets moved. Modern engineers have studied the problem with all the tools available. The most powerful land-based cranes on Earth, the kind used to assemble nuclear reactors or massive bridges, can lift roughly 1,200 tons. Maybe a little more. But they need flat, stable ground. They need months of setup. They need teams of experts. They need fuel and electricity. The ancient builders had none of that. According to the standard timeline, the people who quarried, dragged, and placed the Baalbek stones did so using rollers, ropes, ramps, and muscle, wooden levers, slowly, patiently, over years. This is the official explanation, and it has been demonstrated in smaller scale with replica experiments. Yes, primitive societies could move very large stones. Yes, ramps and rollers work. But at Baalbek, the scale strains belief. For one thing, the surrounding terrain is hilly. Pulling a 600-foot-long, 800-ton block across uneven ground requires precise control. Rollers slip. Ropes snap. One mistake and the stone shatters or crushes anyone in its path. Yet the trilithon stones are intact. Their edges are sharp. Their faces are smooth. Whoever moved them did it without breaking them. For another thing, the placement is unbelievably accurate. Each block sits exactly where it needs to be, in a wall, several feet above the ground, supporting the structure above. Lifting 800 tons that high, without modern cranes, demands engineering ingenuity that mainstream archaeology has trouble fully explaining. And then there is the question of why. Why bother? Smaller blocks would have done the job. Roman builders, who came later, used much smaller stones in their construction at Baalbek and across the empire. The trilithon is from an earlier phase, an older foundation that the Romans simply built on top of. Whoever made the foundation thought it was worth the effort to use stones the size of train cars. Some researchers point to other sites with similar puzzles. The Osirian Temple in Egypt, with its massive granite blocks, the walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, with stones weighing over 200 tons fitted together like puzzle pieces. The platforms at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, with carefully shaped blocks that matched no known tool marks of their time. A pattern emerges. Across multiple continents, there are foundations and platforms built with stones so heavy that no one really knows, in detail, how the ancients managed it. Maybe they had techniques we have forgotten. Maybe they had patience and labor on a scale we cannot imagine. Or maybe, just maybe, the people who built those foundations were not the people we think they were, and the precision of the next site makes Baalbek look almost rough by comparison. High in the mountains of Bolivia, more than 12,000 feet above sea level, sits the strangest ruin in the Americas. Its name is Pumapunku. It is part of a larger complex called Tiwanaku. The thin air at that altitude makes your lungs burn just from walking. The land is cold, dry, and surrounded by silence. Scattered across the ground are blocks of stone that look as if a giant child threw a box of marble puzzle pieces into the dust. The blocks are made of two types of incredibly hard stone. One is a kind of red sandstone. The other is andesite, an even tougher volcanic rock. Many of these stones weigh more than 100 tons. The largest is estimated at over 130 tons. They were quarried in mountains miles away, then dragged up to this high plateau, and then something even more incredible was done to them. The blocks at Pumapunku are not just large, they are precisely cut. Their faces are perfectly flat. Their corners are sharp 90-degree angles. Many blocks have channels grooved into them with consistent depth, as if a router or milling tool had passed across the surface. Some have rows of evenly spaced drill holes, lined up so perfectly that a modern engineer would still want to use a guide. In one famous example, an H-shaped block features two identical sides, with corners and notches that match each other within fractions of an inch. The block looks like an industrial part, the kind of thing you might find sitting on a factory shelf, ready to be bolted into a larger machine. Now consider the tools that were available to the people who supposedly built this. According to the mainstream timeline, The Tiwanaku culture flourished between 1500 and 1000 years ago. They did not have iron, they did not have steel, they did not have power tools. Their best cutting implements were stone hammers, copper chisels, and abrasive sand. With those tools, you can shape stone. Slowly, roughly, the ancient Egyptians did it. The Inca did it. The result usually looks handmade with small irregularities. Beautiful, but recognizably crafted by human hands. Puma Punku does not look like that. Several engineers and stone specialists who have visited the site have come away shaken. The angles are too clean. The flat surfaces too flat. The drill holes too consistent. The precision rivals or exceeds modern industrial cutting in some respects. Some of these experts have publicly stated that with the tools we believe the Tiwanaku had, replicating these blocks would be nearly impossible without enormous amounts of time, manpower, and trial and error. Mainstream archaeologists answer in different ways. They argue that the precision is sometimes exaggerated. They point out that many of the blocks are not as perfect as photographs make them seem. They mention that experimental archaeologists have managed, in small projects, to replicate some of the cuts using only the assumed ancient tools. Other researchers go further. They suggest that the Tiwanaku culture inherited or rediscovered techniques from an even older civilization, one that may have lived in the Andes thousands of years before, and whose true origin is still hidden. Whatever the answer, the stones at Puma Punku do not look like decoration. They look like components, like parts of a much larger machine that fell apart and was scattered across the high plateau, leaving us to guess what it was once meant to do. And the next monument, much more famous, is even more deeply tangled with the sky above it. Just outside Cairo, on a dusty plateau called Giza, stands the most studied building in the world, the Great Pyramid, built more than 4,500 years ago, once covered in polished white limestone so bright it could reflect the sun. Today, it stands stripped down to its core stones, weather-beaten but still towering above the desert. The numbers attached to it are dizzying. It is made up of about 2.5 million stone blocks. The average block weighs around 2.5 tons. Some weigh more than 50 tons. Stacked together, they form a structure roughly 480 feet tall, originally even taller before the cap was lost. For nearly 4,000 years, the Great Pyramid was the tallest man-made object on Earth. But its real strangeness is not in its size. It is in its alignment. The four sides of the Great Pyramid face almost exactly to the cardinal directions: true north, true south, true east, and true west. The accuracy is so high that modern surveyors, with all their tools and satellites, have measured the alignment to be within a tiny fraction of a degree. Some studies suggest the deviation is smaller than the tilt of many modern skyscrapers. To line up a building like that, you need more than ropes and string. You need a deep understanding of astronomy. You need to know how the stars move. You need a way to mark true north without a compass, since no compass existed at the time. You need to be able to do it on a scale of hundreds of feet, in the middle of a desert with thousands of workers, and not make a major mistake. And the Great Pyramid does not stop at the cardinal directions. Some researchers have argued that the layout of the three main pyramids at Giza mirrors the three stars in the belt of the constellation Orion, as they appeared in the sky thousands of years ago. The angle, spacing, and brightness of the stars line up, very roughly, with the angle, spacing, and size of the pyramids on the ground. This is sometimes called the Orion correlation theory. Mainstream archaeologists have pushed back. They point out that the match is not perfect. They argue that the human brain loves finding patterns in the stars, and that other constellations could be made to fit if you tried hard enough. They note that the layout of the pyramids is more easily explained by practical factors, like the shape of the bedrock and the path of the Nile. Both sides have a point. The Orion theory is intriguing, but not airtight. The conventional explanation is solid, but does not fully capture how stunning the alignment is. What is harder to dispute is that the pyramid contains hidden shafts. narrow passages running through its body at very specific angles. Some of these shafts, when traced upward, point toward stars that were significant to ancient Egyptian beliefs. One aimed roughly at the area near the star Sirius. Another aimed toward the region of the sky associated with the constellation now known as Orion. In a building made of solid stone, those shafts had to be planned from the beginning. You cannot drill them in after the fact. They are evidence of a builder who looked up at the heavens before laying the foundation. So we are left with one of two impressive truths. Either the ancient Egyptians, with their bronze tools and primitive instruments, somehow developed astronomical knowledge and engineering precision that astonishes modern experts, or they inherited that knowledge from someone older, someone who knew the sky better than the people they taught. And on the other side of the world, hidden under jungle and rock, evidence of similar deep knowledge runs in tunnels no one can fully map. Deep in the rainforests of Ecuador, hidden under thick green canopy and steep cliffs, there are entrances to caves that do not feel quite natural. Local people have known about them for generations. The Shuar, an indigenous group of the region, tell stories of long passages that descend into the earth, leading to chambers carved by hands much older than their ancestors. In the 1960s, an explorer named Juan Morich claimed to have entered one of these systems. He described tunnels with smooth walls, sharp corners, and floors so flat they seemed polished. The passages, he said, went deep into the mountains. Deep enough to feel the air change. Deep enough to feel small and lost. According to Morich, the tunnels opened up into large halls. Inside, he claimed, were strange objects. Statues, plates, a library of metallic books with engraved pages. He spoke of vast chambers stretching for miles, with side passages branching off in different directions. His story was sensational. Many believed him, others doubted him, some accused him of exaggeration or outright fraud. But the tunnels themselves are real. Cavers and explorers since have confirmed that long, complex underground systems exist in the area. The argument is not whether they exist. The argument is whether they were carved by people or shaped by nature. Mainstream geologists insist they are natural. Limestone caves are common in the region. Water can carve incredible shapes underground over millions of years. Sharp angles can occur where rock layers meet. Flat floors can form where sediment settles. But other researchers have walked these passages with cameras and measuring tools and come away unconvinced. They describe corridors that seem to follow no logical water path. Ceilings that look chiseled rather than dissolved. Joints between blocks that look mortared rather than fused. And similar reports come from other parts of the world. In Brazil, beneath the Amazon basin, geological surveys have suggested the presence of long, oddly straight underground voids that puzzle scientists. Some of these have been attributed to ancient extinct animals like giant ground sloths, which were strong enough to dig huge burrows. These so-called paleoburrows are real and well documented. In Romania, in Eastern Europe, there is a cave called Movile that has been sealed off from the outside world for an estimated 5.5 million years. When scientists finally drilled in, they found bizarre life forms adapted to total darkness and toxic gas. Whatever lives there has been there for far longer than human civilization, in isolation that staggers the imagination. Across the world, beneath places like Cappadocia in Turkey, entire ancient cities were carved into soft volcanic rock, descending dozens of floors underground. These are unquestionably man-made. Their existence proves that humans have, in the past, been willing and able to dig downward on enormous scales. So the question becomes simple. Were the tunnels under the Ecuadorian jungle carved by people we have records of? By people we have forgotten? Or by something else entirely? Some of the most enthusiastic theorists claim the tunnels connect across continents, forming a vast underground network used by an ancient civilization that mastered the deep earth. There is no proof of such a network. Many of the more extreme claims fall apart under careful inspection. But the tunnels exist. The questions exist. The Shuar stories exist. And while underground mysteries hide in the dark, another set of mysteries lies on the surface, drawn in lines on very old paper, lines that should not have been possible to draw. In 1929, in a museum in Istanbul, a Turkish official was sorting through a pile of old documents from the Ottoman Empire when he found something striking. It was a fragment of a map, drawn on gazelle skin, dated to about 1513 of the Common Era. The signature on it was a name well known in Turkish history: Piri Reis, an admiral and cartographer. The map shows the coastline of Western Africa, the eastern edge of South America, and a strange southern landmass that curves along the bottom. The map was admired as a beautiful early example of post-Columbus map-making. Then someone took a closer look at the southern coastline. It looked like Antarctica. Antarctica had been officially discovered only in the early 1800s, more than 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. And the coastline he sketched did not match Antarctica as it appears today. It matched Antarctica as it might appear without ice, as if someone had mapped its rocky shores before glaciers covered them. The frozen continent has been covered in ice for thousands of years, many thousands. The last time substantial parts of its coast may have been ice-free is estimated to be many tens of thousands of years ago. No one in the time of Piri Reis had submarines or radar. No one could see through the ice. So how did the map show what it shows? Piri Reis himself wrote a note on his map. He explained that he had compiled it from older maps. Some were very ancient, he said. Some had been used by Columbus during his voyages. Some, according to Piri Reis, came from sources whose origin he did not know. In other words, he was copying. That admission opens an unsettling door. If he was copying older maps, then the knowledge of an ice-free Antarctica must have existed in those older documents. Where did those older documents come from? Who drew them? When? A retired American military officer and amateur historian named Charles Hapgood spent years studying the Piri Reis map in the mid-1900s. He was joined by a small group of cartographers. Their conclusion, controversial then and controversial now, was that the map seemed to show a real understanding of the continent beneath the ice. They claimed similar details could be found on a few other ancient maps as well. The mainstream response was firm. They argued that the southern coastline on the Piri Reis map is not really Antarctica. It is a distorted version of South America. The shapes do not match modern surveys of Antarctica perfectly. The whole idea, in their view, was wishful thinking. The counter-argument from the alternative side is just as firm. They point out that the curves and bays in the map line up surprisingly well with subsurface mapping of Antarctica done by modern radar. They argue that the distortion is no worse than other early maps of better-known regions. The debate has cooled, but never died. Other old maps add to the strangeness. Some maps from the 15 and 1600s show what appears to be a green Greenland with rivers and harbours, even though most of it has been buried under ice for thousands of years. Others depict South America with details that, for the era, seem too accurate. The simplest explanation is luck and exaggeration. The more dramatic explanation is that knowledge survived from a much earlier time, copied and recopied, from someone who walked those shores when they were still warm. And the next mystery has heat of its own, not from imagination, from actual readings, taken with modern instruments, deep inside a hill that is not supposed to exist. In the small town of Visoko, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is a hill that looks too perfect. From a distance, its sides slope in straight lines. Its corners line up like the faces of a true pyramid. Trees and soil cover it now, but underneath, something hard and shaped seems to lie. In 2005, a Bosnian-born American researcher named Semir Osmanagic declared that the hill was not a hill at all. It was, he claimed, an ancient pyramid, possibly the largest ever built, hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. He named it the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun. A nearby hill, also suspiciously shaped, he called the Pyramid of the Moon. Smaller hills around them got similar names. The mainstream archaeological world rolled its eyes. Professional groups issued statements warning that the formations were natural. Geologists called them flat irons, a type of triangular rock outcrop that occurs around the world. They argued that Osmanagic was misleading the public, attracting tourism money on the back of pseudoscience. Then the measurements started. Excavations on the sides of the hills revealed flat, polished surfaces of stone. Long, smooth slabs joined together with what looks like ancient mortar. Tunnels were uncovered, running deep into the hills, with worked walls and arched ceilings. Some of the stones in these tunnels show clear tool marks, including straight cuts and drilled holes. That alone does not prove ancient pyramids, but it forced even some skeptics to admit that there is, at minimum, an old man-made structure somewhere beneath the surface. Then came the heat readings. Independent researchers, using thermal imaging cameras, reported that the Bosnian Pyramid Hill releases unusual heat patterns. In areas where the sun is not directly striking, the surface shows warmth that does not match the surrounding land. Some observers describe the heat as coming from inside, as if the structure has its own thermal source. Then came the ultrasound measurements. Several research teams have recorded what they say is a low-frequency hum coming from the top of the largest hill. The signal, they claim, is around 28 kHz. They describe it as steady, beam-like, and stronger at the very top than at the base. Standard geological formations should not behave that way. Inside the network of underground tunnels, sometimes called ravne tunnels, similar strange readings have been reported. Some visitors describe an unusual sense of calm, others claim minor health improvements after spending time there. Tests of the air inside have shown elevated levels of negative ions, a phenomenon associated with mountain forests and waterfalls. Mainstream scientists urge caution. Many of these reports come from researchers connected to the same project. They have not, in most cases, been independently confirmed by major universities or institutions. Thermal images can be misleading. Ultrasound readings can have many sources. The negative ion data can be explained by groundwater and humidity. The skeptics may be right. The whole project may turn out to be an elaborate misreading of natural features, dressed up as ancient marvels for tourism. Or it may be that, beneath the soil of a quiet European town, something far older and far stranger is silently doing what it was built to do, in ways modern science is only beginning to detect. And if structures of stone can hide for so long, then perhaps the most disturbing mystery of all is not in stone. It is in bone. Bones that by every rule we know should not exist. In southern Africa, near a place called Sterkfontein, deep in a cave system, paleontologists have spent decades digging through ancient layers in search of our ancestors. The site is famous for fossils of early hominins, skulls, jaws, bits of arms and legs, stone tools. The work is patient and slow. The dating is careful. Every fragment is logged and analyzed. From these caves, scientists have pieced together part of the story of how human ancestors evolved over the last few million years. But every so often, a fossil is pulled from a layer where it should not appear. There are cases, scattered around the world, where bones or partial skeletons that look strikingly modern have been found in rock dated far older than any modern human is supposed to be. One controversial collection of specimens, sometimes called the Castanedolo skeletons, was excavated in northern Italy in the late 1800s. The bones reportedly came from a layer dated to the Pliocene era, more than 3 million years old. 3 million years. That is long before our species, Homo sapiens, existed. According to the standard timeline, the only creatures walking upright then were small-brained early hominins like Australopithecus, with thick brow ridges and ape-like features. The Castanedolo bones, however, were described as fully modern in shape. Skulls that looked like ours, arm and leg bones that matched living humans. They caused a sensation when they were found, then quietly faded from mainstream attention. Many experts argued that the bones must have been intrusive burials, where later people dug into older soil to bury their dead, leaving the bones in a deceptive layer. That explanation is reasonable in many cases. Graves are dug into older ground all the time. Without absolutely clear evidence of an undisturbed layer above the bones, claims of impossible antiquity remain unproven. Still, the Castanedolo case is one of many. There are reports of similarly anomalous remains in California, where in the 1800s, gold miners hundreds of feet below the surface in old gravels reportedly unearthed human bones and stone tools. The age of those gravels is estimated at many millions of years. Local newspapers covered the discoveries with excitement. The original finds, often called the Calaveras skull and related Table Mountain artifacts, became the subject of fierce scientific debate. Some experts denounced them as hoaxes from the start. Others took them seriously, including a respected paleontologist of the time who personally examined some of the material. The truth was never fully settled. Several of the specimens were lost or destroyed over the years. In Africa, in places like Lake Turkana in Kenya, modern paleontologists have found tools that push back the date of toolmaking far earlier than once believed. Stone tools dated to more than 3 million years ago have been recovered. That date itself is shocking enough. It means someone or something capable of consistent crafting was active before our genus Homo even arose. These are not necessarily proofs of lost civilizations. They may simply be proofs that the story of human evolution is more complicated than the simple staircase pictures in textbooks. But there is a thread that runs through all these cases. Again and again, the Earth offers up bones and tools and shaped objects in places they should not be. Again and again, science explains some of them and shrugs at others. The picture that slowly emerges is not of a clean, simple past. It is of a planet with deeper memory than we want to admit. And the strangest text-based clue of all may come from a book no one alive today can read. In 1912, a Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich was browsing through a dusty crate of old manuscripts at a Jesuit college in Italy. Most of the books were ordinary religious texts. Then he pulled out one that stopped him cold. It was a small volume, about 240 pages long. The cover was plain. The pages were vellum made from animal skin. The book was clearly old, but the moment he opened it, he realized he was looking at something that had never been seen before. Every page was written in an unknown script. The handwriting was elegant, confident, flowing left to right. The letters looked like a real alphabet, with consistent shapes appearing again and again. There were spaces between words, paragraph breaks, even what looked like chapter markers. It was clearly a language, used carefully and intentionally. But no one, in over 100 years of trying, has been able to translate a single sentence. The illustrations are just as strange. Pages are filled with drawings of plants that match no species on Earth. Strange leaves, twisted roots, bizarre flowers. Some look almost familiar, like distant cousins of plants we know. Others look like nothing in any biology book. Other sections show what appear to be naked human figures, mostly women, bathing in green pools connected by intricate tube-like channels. Some figures stand inside cylindrical containers. The plumbing is so detailed it has been called proto-engineering. Still, other pages display elaborate circular diagrams, wheels within wheels, star-like shapes, astrological signs surrounded by tiny text. They look like charts of the heavens, but they do not match any constellation in any known star atlas. Carbon dating of the vellum places the manuscript in the early 1400s. The ink and pigments are consistent with that time period. So it is real, it is genuinely old, it is not a modern forgery, and yet no one knows what it says. Over the past century, the world's best code breakers have studied it. Military cryptographers who cracked enemy codes during major wars have stared at the same pages. Mathematicians have applied statistical analysis. Linguists have compared it to every known and dead language. Computer scientists have fed the text into algorithms designed to spot patterns. Some progress has been made. The text appears to follow real linguistic rules. Certain letter combinations are common, others are rare. The frequency of letters is consistent with a natural language, not random gibberish. Some scholars have suggested it might be a code based on an existing language. Others have proposed it is a constructed language, invented for a secret purpose. A few argue it is a private shorthand of a single author, perhaps a healer or alchemist who used it to hide knowledge. A few even argue it is a hoax, a nonsense text dressed up to look like a real document, possibly created to fool a wealthy buyer hundreds of years ago. But the hoax theory has problems. The patterns in the text are too consistent over so many pages. The illustrations are too detailed. The effort involved in producing the book would have been enormous. A simple hoax usually shows signs of carelessness somewhere. The Voynich manuscript does not. So we are left with a book that is real, old, and unreadable. A message in a bottle, washed up on the shore of history, written by someone who clearly wanted to be remembered, but in a way only the right reader could understand. Whoever they were, they may have known things no one else did, and the next clue carved into stone hints at beings who look nothing like us at all. In remote canyons, on cliff faces, and inside hidden caves around the world, ancient artists left their mark. With coloured mud, charcoal, and crushed minerals, they painted what they saw: animals, hunters, family scenes, daily life. Most cave paintings are exactly what you would expect: bison, deer, horses, hands pressed against stone with paint blown around them. They tell stories of a world dominated by big animals and small bands of people trying to survive. But scattered among the familiar scenes are images that do not fit. In a region of Australia called Kimberley, ancient rock paintings show figures called Wangina. They have large oval heads with no mouths, big black eyes, white faces, halos around their heads. They tower over the smaller human figures painted near them. The local Aboriginal people say these are the creator spirits who came from the sky in the long ago time. In central Italy, in the mountainous region of Val Camonica, prehistoric carvings dated to thousands of years ago show figures wearing what look like helmets. Two of them are depicted holding strange tools that resemble modern technical instruments. Lines radiate from their heads, as if they are emitting energy. They look, frankly, like astronauts. In central France, deep inside the famous cave of Lascaux, paintings of bulls and horses cover the walls, but in one shaft, there is a strange image of a falling figure with a bird-like head, near a wounded bison, with a small stick and a bird beside him. Some interpret it as a hunting accident, others see something more, especially given the unusual head shape and the careful arrangement of the symbols around it. In Africa, in the Tassili N'Adja region of Algeria, ancient paintings on rock walls show enormous round-headed figures floating above smaller human ones. The shapes have been called the Great Martian God in some popular interpretations. Scholars argue about whether they represent gods, masked dancers, ceremonial costumes, or something stranger. Around the world, the pattern repeats. Among normal scenes of hunting, dancing, and gathering, certain images stand out. Figures with elongated skulls, beings with circles or rays around their heads, strange objects in the sky, discs, cigar-shaped vessels, triangles, crosses. Some of these images can be explained as symbolic representations of suns and moons, ritual masks, or stylized depictions of spiritual beings. The human imagination is rich, and ancient peoples had complex religious lives. Not every odd painting is evidence of contact with non-human visitors, but the consistency across cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, is what makes the pattern hard to ignore. People who never met each other, who lived on different continents, in different climates, with different languages and traditions, often painted similar strange beings descending from above. Mainstream archaeologists explain this with shared human psychology. Across cultures, dreams, drugs, and spiritual rituals can produce similar visual experiences. The mind has common templates. People in different places independently invent flying gods and otherworldly visitors because the human brain is wired to imagine them. That is a clean explanation. It may be the right one, or it may be that in different ways, across different times, our ancestors all saw something. Something that came down. Something that left an impression so strong that they carved or painted it onto stone, hoping someone, someday, would notice. And in a remote part of China, one of the strangest objects ever associated with such stories was reportedly found buried in a hidden cave. High in the Bayanhar Mountains, on the border between Tibet and the Chinese province of Sichuan, lies one of the strangest tales in modern archaeology, the story of the Dropa stones. According to reports that surfaced in the mid-1900s, a Chinese expedition explored a remote cave system in the area. Inside, they supposedly found rows of graves containing small skeletons. The skeletons were said to be unusually short, with thin bones and large heads. Beside them lay stone discs, hundreds of them. The discs were said to be the size of a long-playing record. Each one had a small hole drilled in the exact center. Spiraling out from the center, in tight grooves cut into the surface, were tiny carved symbols. So small, they could barely be seen without magnification. The discovery, if real, was extraordinary. The story claims that a Chinese researcher named Tsum Nui spent years studying the discs. After painstaking work, he announced that he had translated some of the symbols. According to his alleged translation, the discs told the story of a group of beings who descended from the sky in ships, crashed into the mountains, and were unable to leave. They lived among the local people for generations, and eventually died out. The locals, according to the story, told of two small mountain tribes named the Dropa and the Han. Both groups, the tale claimed, were of unusually small stature, with thin limbs and large heads. It is an incredible story. It also has very serious problems. No clear scientific paper exists confirming the original Chinese expedition. The name Tsum Nui does not match traditional Chinese naming conventions, and no record of his official academic career has ever been firmly established. The discs themselves, supposedly held in Chinese museums, have not been openly displayed for international researchers to study. The few photographs that exist are blurry, taken decades ago, and show only one or two examples that might or might not be the discs described. Many modern researchers consider the Dropa stones to be a hoax. They argue that the story grew through retellings, picking up dramatic details with each version until it became an inflated legend without solid evidence. And yet, the legend refuses to vanish completely. The reason is partly because of the location. The Bayanhar Mountains are remote and difficult to access. Few Western archaeologists have ever explored them in depth. The terrain hides countless caves. The Chinese government has not opened the region to free international research. There is room for the imagination to wonder what might still be there. There is also room because of other reports. Indigenous communities in nearby parts of Asia have long traditions about small mountain peoples with unusual features. Some of these stories predate the modern Dropa story by centuries. They speak of dwarfish beings who came from the stars and taught early humans certain skills before disappearing. Are these tales pure folklore? Almost certainly, in part. Folklore mixes real memory, dream, fear, and imagination into stories that change over time. But folklore from very different cultures around the world often contains echoes of the same themes. Visitors from the sky, lost mountain tribes, strange discs and stones, symbols that cannot be read. The Dropa stones, real or not, fit perfectly into that wider pattern. They feel like a bigger story trying to push its way out through the cracks. And while the Dropa stones may be impossible to verify, there is another set of carvings that absolutely exist. They are so large they can only be properly seen from the sky. In southern Peru, between two small towns named Nazca and Palpa, stretches a high, dry desert plateau. The air is thin. The wind is steady. The ground is covered in a thin layer of dark, iron-rich stones, sitting on lighter-colored soil underneath. For most of human history, no one noticed anything unusual about it. Then, in the 1920s and 30s, pilots flying over the area looked down and saw something extraordinary. Enormous shapes had been drawn into the desert floor, long straight lines stretching for miles, geometric patterns, triangles, trapezoids, and spirals, and animals, giant animals, a spider, a monkey with a curled tail, a hummingbird in flight, a condor with outstretched wings, a whale, a pelican, a tree, a pair of hands. Strange humanoid figures with round heads, sometimes called astronauts because of their odd, helmet-like skulls. The figures range from about 150 feet across to more than 1,000 feet in length. They were created by carefully removing the dark surface stones, exposing the lighter soil underneath, forming pale outlines that contrast with the darker desert around them. These are the Nazca Lines. They were created over a long period of time by the Nazca culture between about 2,000 years ago and roughly 1,500 years ago. The mystery is not who made them. The Nazca people are well known to archaeologists. Their pottery and burials have been studied for decades. Many of the artistic motifs on the desert floor match designs on Nazca ceramics. The mystery is why and how. The figures are so large that from the ground, you cannot recognize what they are. You can walk right across one of the giant lines and see nothing but a shallow, pale path under your feet. To see the spider, the monkey, the bird, you have to be high above, looking down from the sky. The Nazca had no aircraft. They had no hot air balloons. They had no hills tall enough to provide a clean overhead view of the figures. So how did they design such precise drawings without being able to see them from above? Mainstream archaeologists have offered practical explanations. The Nazca, they argue, used careful surveying techniques. They likely worked from small-scale drawings, scaling them up using ropes, stakes, and patient measurement. They built the figures piece by piece, line by line, with workers following pre-marked paths. It is doable. Some experimental projects have shown that with the right planning, a smaller version of a Nazca-style figure can be scaled up by hand on the ground. But that explanation answers the how, not the why. Why go to such enormous effort for figures that no one walking on the surface can see? Several theories have been proposed. Some researchers believe the lines were sacred paths used in religious ceremonies, where the act of walking the figure mattered more than seeing it. Others think they were related to the search for water, with certain lines pointing toward underground sources. Some suggest astronomical alignments, with lines matching the rising and setting of certain stars, or the sun at key points in the year. A more daring idea is that the figures were made to be seen by someone above. The gods, perhaps? Or beings the Nazca believed lived in the sky? Maybe, some say, the figures were even visible markers for visitors who came from beyond Earth. That last idea sits at the fringe. It is impossible to prove. It is also impossible to fully disprove. And while the Nazca lines stretch outward, another set of mysterious works does the opposite. It drives downward, into perfectly cut walls hidden beneath a quiet Chinese village. In the rural hills near Longyu in eastern China, there is a village whose people for centuries never knew what was beneath their fields. The ground hid pools of clear, cold water in odd, deep holes. Local farmers thought they were ordinary ponds, fed by springs. In 1992, a few villagers decided to drain one of these ponds with pumps. After days of pumping, the water level fell, and kept falling, and kept falling. What emerged was not a pond. It was a vast underground chamber, carved out of solid stone. The walls rose more than 100 feet high. The ceiling was supported by enormous angled pillars. The floor stretched out in a regular shape. Every surface on the walls, the columns, and the ceiling was marked by thousands of parallel cuts, made at the same angle and spacing. When more ponds were drained, They revealed similar chambers, some larger, some smaller. In total, 24 were eventually discovered, all carved into the same sandstone hillside, the Longyu Caves. Each chamber is shaped like an inverted bathtub. The walls slope inward as they rise. The ceiling is supported by stone pillars left in place by the original builders. Some chambers cover thousands of square feet of floor space. The amount of stone removed to create all 24 would total nearly 1 million cubic yards. Carrying that much rock away would require a massive labor force, working over years, perhaps decades. And yet, in all the ancient records of the region, no one ever wrote about this project. That is the first mystery. China has one of the oldest continuous written traditions on Earth. Local histories, court records, and tax documents go back thousands of years. A construction project this big should have left a trace in some scroll, some carving, some line of poetry, but there is silence. The second mystery is the tool marks. The parallel grooves on the walls run in straight lines, at consistent angles, with consistent spacing. They look like the tracks of a giant chisel being dragged systematically across each surface. Yet they were all made with metal tools. The chambers must have been carved before the modern industrial age. According to current estimates, they are at least 2,000 years old, possibly much older. The third mystery is what they were for. They are not tombs. No burials have been found inside. They are not storerooms. No artifacts have been left in them. They are not natural caves. Their geometry is too clean and too consistent. Some researchers have proposed they were used as quarries, places to mine sandstone for construction projects elsewhere. But if that is true, the engineering is excessive. Quarries are usually rough and irregular. The Longyu Caves are precise and stylized. Other ideas have been suggested. Military shelters, underground temples, storage for grain or fish, hidden palaces for forgotten rulers. None of these explanations have strong support. The most unsettling possibility is the simplest one. The Longyu Caves are evidence of a skilled ancient culture whose history has been completely lost. People who knew how to carve the earth on a vast scale, but whose name, language, and beliefs have vanished from the record. They built, they left, they were forgotten. And there are other places like this. Sites where the design speaks of intelligence and effort far beyond what we would expect from the supposed inhabitants of the region. Sites that whisper of forgotten chapters, and the next set of objects, pulled from rocks billions of years old, may push the timeline even further back than any human story. We have already met the spheres of Klerksdorp in South Africa. Round, grooved, dense, found embedded in pyrophyllite, roughly 2.5 billion years old. Their story is famous in alternative archaeology circles and remains one of the most cited examples of an out-of-place artifact. But there are other reports of strange metallic objects coming out of deep time rock around the world. In Russia, in the Ural Mountains in the 1990s, gold miners reported finding tiny metal spirals embedded in sediment layers tens of thousands of years old. Some of the spirals were microscopic, only a fraction of a millimeter across. Others were larger, visible to the naked eye. They were made of materials including tungsten and molybdenum, both of which require high temperatures to refine. These spirals do not by themselves prove anything wild. Some scientists have argued they are debris from later industrial activity or rocket testing in the region. The Soviet Union conducted many tests in remote areas during the 20th century, and contamination of older sediments by modern industrial waste is not uncommon. In Romania, the Aiud aluminum wedge, found in 1974 near the Moors River, has attracted attention. Workers digging in a sand quarry uncovered, alongside the bones of extinct prehistoric mammals, a strange wedge-shaped object. It looked like part of a tool. It was made of aluminum, an unusual metal for any pre-industrial culture, since aluminum is difficult to refine and was not commonly produced until modern times. Initial reports said the surrounding sediment was very old, suggesting the wedge had been buried alongside the bones for tens of thousands of years. Later analyses contested those claims, arguing the wedge could be much more recent and accidentally placed near the bones. Without a clean chain of custody and independent verification, the truth is hard to pin down. There are reports from West Virginia in the 1800s of a small iron mass, possibly artificial, found embedded in coal. Other early American reports describe coin-shaped objects pulled from deep wells in the 1870s. There are tales from Russia, Australia, and several countries in Africa of similar finds, often documented poorly, often passed from newspaper to newspaper without scientific verification. Most of these stories collapse under close inspection. Some are misidentified natural objects. Some are pieces of equipment lost by miners or geologists. Some are flat-out hoaxes. A small few do not have a clear explanation. What matters is not any single object. It is the pattern. Over and over, across continents and decades, people who dig deeply into the Earth report finding things that do not fit the timeline. Some reports are easy to dismiss, others are harder. A few, with multiple witnesses, careful documentation, and surviving physical objects, are very hard to dismiss completely. If even a handful of these objects are real, and are truly as old as their context suggests, then someone or something was already shaping metal billions of years before our current scientific timeline allows. That someone left no cities, no skeletons, no records, only tiny mysteries embedded in rock for the next intelligent species to find. If that idea sounds wild, remember the Oklo reactor, a natural nuclear chain reaction we discovered only after a careful look. The Earth has hidden surprises before. It almost certainly hides more. And the next set of remains the Earth has surrendered look much closer to us. So close, in fact, that they raise questions about who, exactly, we share our family tree with. In Peru, in the dry coastal valleys near the city of Paracas, archaeologists in the 1920s uncovered a strange cemetery. It was the work of a Peruvian researcher named Julio Tello. The graves were old, dating from about 3,000 years ago. The bodies inside were unlike any others. Their skulls were enormous, far larger than typical human skulls, far more elongated, stretched upward into long, narrow shapes, almost like cones tilted backward. Some of the skulls were nearly twice the volume of a normal, modern human cranium. These are the Paracas skulls. Hundreds of them have been excavated since. At first glance, they look like an extreme example of intentional skull shaping. Many ancient cultures practiced cranial deformation, binding the heads of infants with cloth or boards to gradually mold their skulls into desired shapes. The Maya did it. Some African and Asian cultures did it. Even certain European tribes did it. It is a real, well-documented practice. Cranial binding can produce dramatic elongation, but there are limits. The brain cannot be made larger by binding. The skull can be reshaped, but its total internal volume stays roughly the same. The plates of the skull move, but they do not grow. The Paracas skulls do not always behave like ordinary bound skulls. Some specimens have an internal volume significantly larger than a typical human brain case. Some have only one parietal plate at the top of the head, rather than the usual two fused along a central seam. Some have unusual openings at the base of the skull, in different positions than in modern humans. Researchers have conducted some genetic testing on hair and bone fragments from a few Paracas skulls. The results, published in alternative archaeology circles, have been controversial. Some studies have reportedly found unusual sequences of mitochondrial deoxyribonucleic acid, suggesting genetic lineages that do not closely match any known modern population. Mainstream geneticists urge caution. Ancient deoxyribonucleic acid is notoriously difficult to extract and analyze. Contamination is common. The institutions doing the testing have not always followed standard scientific protocols. Some peer-reviewed reanalysis has argued that the supposed anomalies fit within human variation, especially when combined with the effects of head binding starting in infancy. Still, the size and shape of the Paracas skulls continue to make even skeptical researchers uncomfortable. Similar elongated skulls have been found in other places. In Russia, near a place called Archaeum. In Bolivia and around Lake Titicaca. In Egypt, where some royal portraits, especially those of Pharaoh Akhenaten and members of his family, show clearly elongated heads. Whether those royal portraits reflect actual cranial deformation or simply an artistic style remains debated. The pattern that emerges is this. Across the world, in different cultures, people seem to have admired or revered beings with long, narrow heads. They sometimes shape their own infants to imitate that look. Why? The simplest answer is status. Elongated skulls may have been a marker of nobility or priestly class. Parents bound their children's heads to mark them as members of a special group. A more dramatic possibility is memory. What if, in the distant past, some original beings actually had long, large heads? What if later cultures, awed by them, tried to imitate their look using their own children? The original beings in this story would be long gone. Only their image would survive, copied in flesh and bone by generations of admirers who never met them. That theory has no proof. It is speculation. But it is hard to walk past a row of Paracas skulls and not feel that something more is going on than ordinary cultural fashion. And while strange beings may haunt the bones of one ancient region, entire civilizations have, on a much larger scale, simply vanished from sight. There is something deeply unsettling about a place that was once full of people, music, smoke, voices, prayers, arguments, footsteps, and then went silent. Whole cultures have done this. Consider the Indus Valley civilization in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. Around 4,500 years ago, it was one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. Its cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, had grid-patterned streets, multi-story brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, public baths, and standardized weights and measures. Some estimates suggest its largest cities housed tens of thousands of people, possibly more. Then, over a few centuries, it all faded. The cities emptied. Trade routes collapsed. Writing in the Indus script, still undeciphered today, stopped being used. The population scattered. No invading army has been clearly identified. No single catastrophe has been agreed upon. Possible causes include climate change, drying rivers, disease, and internal upheaval. The civilization simply unwound. Consider the Maya in Central America. From around the 4th century to the 9th century of the Common Era, they built towering cities in the jungle. Tikal, Palenque, Calakmul. Their pyramids reached above the canopy. Their astronomers tracked the planets. Their scribes wrote in glyphs covering long folded books. Their cities were full of life. Then, the southern lowland Maya cities collapsed. The great temples were abandoned. The jungle grew over them. The population in many regions dropped sharply over a relatively short period. Drought, warfare, deforestation, and political failure are all suspected. The Maya people themselves did not vanish. Many descendants still live in the area today, but the elite culture, the centralized cities, the literate priesthood, all of that quietly disappeared. Consider the Khmer Empire in Cambodia, with its capital at Angkor. At its peak, it may have been the largest pre-industrial city on Earth, with vast canal systems and millions of inhabitants. Then, over a few centuries, Angkor declined. The canals filled with silt. The capital moved. The jungle took back the temples. The history of Earth is full of such examples. Empires rise, cities glitter. Then, sometimes within a few generations, they slip into ruin. What makes this thread important here is what it suggests about deeper time. If we have lost so many civilizations in just the last few thousand years, what about the tens of thousands of years before that? The hundreds of thousands? Modern humans, in our current anatomical form, have existed for at least 200,000 years. For most of that time, we are told, our ancestors lived as scattered hunter-gatherers. No cities, no complex civilizations, just Small bands, moving slowly, leaving little behind. But what if that picture is wrong? What if, during those long stretches, some groups built more complex societies and then lost them? Wooden structures rot. Earthen mounds erode. Cloth, leather, paper, and reed crumble into soil. Even stone, given enough time and weather, can vanish almost completely. If a civilization existed 30,000 years ago, in a place now under the sea or buried beneath a forest, we might never know. The evidence would be so faint, so scattered that even careful archaeology could miss it. A few sites already hint that the official story might not capture everything. Göbekli Tepe, as we have seen, pushed the date of monument building back by thousands of years. Underwater structures off Japan and India suggest the possibility of sunken cultures. Strange foundations and work stones around the world keep raising questions. The point is simple. The Earth is older than our memory. Civilizations can vanish without a trace, and one of those vanished worlds may lie not under jungle, not under ocean, but under sand, in a place we now think of as the world's largest desert. When you picture the Sahara today, you imagine an ocean of sand. Endless dunes, burning heat, bone-dry winds, hardly any life. A landscape so harsh that traveling across it can kill you in a few days. That is not how the Sahara has always looked. Geological and biological evidence makes it absolutely clear. Several times in the last few 100,000 years, the Sahara was green. Not just a little green, lushly green, with rivers, lakes, savannas, grasslands, forests, and abundant wildlife. The most recent of these wet phases is called the African Humid Period. It started about 15,000 years ago and lasted off and on until about 5,000 years ago. During this time, much of what is now desert was a rich, wet landscape. The signs are everywhere, once you know how to look. Buried beneath the Sahara are giant ancient riverbeds. Modern satellite imagery has traced these channels under the sand. Some of them rival or exceed the size of the Nile. They flowed across what is now hyper-arid desert, carrying water from inland mountains to the sea. Beneath the sand are also dried lake beds. Once, the area near modern Chad was a vast inland sea, possibly larger than the Caspian. Bones of crocodiles, hippos, fish, and giant turtles have been found in places where today not a drop of fresh water flows. Rock art carved into Saharan mountain caves shows giraffes, elephants, antelopes, lions, and cattle. People in the paintings hunt, dance, herd, and worship. Whole scenes of green life painted on stones now surrounded by burning sand. The art dates from many thousands of years ago, when the desert was still alive. This is settled science. The wet Sahara is not a fringe theory. It is widely accepted by climatologists and archaeologists. What is less settled is what may have happened during the wet phases. For thousands of years, vast green regions of North Africa supported large human populations. Where did they live? What did they build? What stories did they tell? We have only fragments: stone tools, cave paintings, a few burial sites, some bones. But buried beneath the modern desert, satellite imagery has spotted what appear to be ancient settlements. Geometric outlines under the sand, walls, foundations, possibly even small cities. Most of these sites have not yet been excavated. The desert is enormous and digging is expensive. Many of these structures are unverified. A few have been studied. They reveal small communities of herders, farmers, and fishermen who lived along the ancient lakes and rivers. Their cultures vanished as the rains failed and the desert returned. The bigger question is whether something more advanced ever existed there. Was there a city in the Green Sahara that we have not yet found? A culture with architecture and writing? A precursor to the great civilizations along the Nile? It is plausible. The Sahara was bigger than Europe, lush for thousands of years, rich with food, water, and animals. If even one major culture arose there and was later buried under sand, we might be looking right at it from satellites, without yet realizing what we see. When climate shifted, those people had to leave. Many likely migrated toward the Nile and helped seed the cultures that built Egypt. Their old homes faded into wind and dune. The Sahara is a graveyard hiding under a sheet of sand. It may yet give up more than we expect. And speaking of underground worlds, the next site shows just how serious ancient people could be about going down into the earth to escape something terrible. In the dry, rocky region of Cappadocia in central Turkey, the soft volcanic rock has been shaped by wind and water into otherworldly forms. Cones, spires, mushroom-shaped pillars, whole landscapes that look more like another planet than a part of Earth. The rock there is unusual. It is a kind of compacted volcanic ash called tuff. It is soft enough to dig into with hand tools. It is also strong enough, once dug, to hold its shape for thousands of years. Ancient peoples noticed this and began to carve. At first small chambers, then larger ones, then houses, then chapels, then entire cities. Hidden beneath the surface of Cappadocia are underground cities, many. Most are small. Some are vast. The most famous is called Derinkuyu. It descends at least 8 levels below the ground. Some estimates say up to 18. It includes living quarters, kitchens, churches, schools, wineries, oil presses, stables for livestock, deep wells, and ventilation shafts. It could house an estimated 20,000 people for extended periods, along with their food, water, and animals. Massive circular stone doors, like wheels of rock, could be rolled into place to seal off corridors. From the inside, the doors had small holes through which weapons could be used to defend against attackers. From the outside, they were nearly impossible to move. The construction is enormous, cutting down 8 or more levels through volcanic stone, designing ventilation that keeps fresh air flowing all the way to the deepest rooms, providing water sources at multiple levels, organizing space for thousands of people and animals. All of this required serious engineering and serious motivation. You do not build a city like Derinkuyu for fun. You build it because you are terrified of something on the surface. Mainstream historians point to documented threats. Early Christians used some of these cities to hide from Roman and later Arab persecution. Local communities used them to shelter from raiders during periods of war. Their use in historical times is well established. But many researchers believe the underground cities were not originally Christian projects. They appear to be much older, possibly thousands of years older. Excavations and study of the rock cuts suggest that some of the lower levels may date back to early Iron Age or even Bronze Age civilizations. Some traditions associate them with the Hittites, an ancient empire of the region. Others speculate even earlier origins. If the cities are very old, then the question of who they were originally hiding from becomes harder to answer. Local raiders, climatic disasters, plagues, or something stranger. Some popular speculation has suggested the cities were built to hide from threats from the sky. Others mention legends of dark times when the world was dangerous to walk above. There is no firm evidence for the more exotic theories, but the sheer scale of the underground cities and their existence across many sites in Cappadocia and beyond suggests an ancient pattern. People sometimes went deep underground for long periods. They were willing to spend generations of work to build hidden refuges, and the strange thing is, similar underground complexes exist in other parts of the world. In China, in Iran, in Malta, with its famous hypogum carved into limestone. In Mexico, where natural caves were extended and adapted into ritual spaces. Whatever drove people to dig, the urge was widespread. There is something almost primal about it, as if humans at certain moments in their history felt safer below the ground than on it. And speaking of vast primal stories, no chapter on ancient mysteries is complete without one of the most controversial of all. The idea of an entire continent that may or may not have once existed. About 2,400 years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato sat down to write 2 dialogues. One was called Timaeus, the other was called Critias. Both included a story he claimed had been passed down to a famous Athenian lawgiver named Solon by Egyptian priests. That story was about Atlantis. According to Plato, Atlantis was a great island civilization that existed about 9,000 years before his own time. It was located, he said, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most scholars interpret as the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a powerful empire, rich in metals, with grand temples, palaces, harbours, and fleets of ships. It controlled lands across the western Mediterranean and beyond. But over time, Plato wrote, the people of Atlantis grew arrogant and corrupt. The gods grew angry. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island sank beneath the sea in a great earthquake and flood. It vanished. For more than 2,000 years, scholars have argued about whether Plato meant this story literally or as a moral fable. Most mainstream historians today consider Atlantis to be a literary invention. Plato, they argue, was using the story to teach a lesson about pride and political downfall. He was not writing history. The detailed geography and dates were dressing, not data. That is a strong position. Plato himself was a philosopher, not a historian. He invented other tales in his dialogues to illustrate moral ideas. Atlantis fits the pattern of such a fable, but the story has refused to die. Over the centuries, hundreds of theories have placed Atlantis in different real-world locations. The most popular candidates include the Greek island of Santorini, devastated by a massive volcanic eruption around 3,600 years ago. The eruption, possibly the largest in human history, would have destroyed the Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. Some researchers believe this real event may have inspired the legend of Atlantis. Other proposed locations include the Mediterranean island of Sardinia, the coast of Spain, the Sahara region of North Africa, the Caribbean, the Bermuda area, the Bahamas, and even Antarctica. Each theory has its supporters and detractors. Each is based on some combination of geological data, mythology, and imagination. There is also a wider category of stories around the world about sunken or lost continents. Lemuria, a hypothesized lost land in the Indian or Pacific Ocean. Mu, a related concept of a vanished Pacific civilization. Hyperborea, an ancient northern realm. These stories appear in various forms in different cultures, often associated with the idea of a great flood or catastrophe that wiped out advanced peoples. Most of these stories have little or no solid scientific support. There is no geological evidence for a continent the size of Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean. The deep sea floor does not show the remains of such a place. Plate tectonics, the scientific understanding of how continents move, generally rules out the rapid sinking of large landmasses in the timeframes these legends describe. But pieces of land have changed. Sea levels have risen dramatically since the last ice age. Coastlines have shifted. Islands have appeared and disappeared due to volcanic activity. Underwater archaeology continues to find ruins of cities and harbors below modern oceans. So perhaps the legends are not literal but symbolic. Memories of real losses. Real cities swallowed by rising seas. Real catastrophes magnified and stylized over thousands of years of retelling, until they became one giant story of a perfect kingdom that fell. If so, Plato's Atlantis may be a final echo of a much older trauma. A trauma still buried, in part, in the genes of survivors. The human family tree, once imagined as a tidy single trunk, is now known to be a tangled bush. For decades, scientists thought modern humans, Homo sapiens, simply replaced earlier human species like Neanderthals. We arrived, we spread, they died out, and that was that. The story was clean. Then came genetic analysis. Starting in the early 2000s, geneticists managed to extract usable deoxyribonucleic acid from ancient Neanderthal bones. They compared it with the deoxyribonucleic acid from modern people around the world. The results startled the field. Most non-African humans carry small but real amounts of Neanderthal deoxyribonucleic acid. On average, about 1 to 2% of the genome of people of European or Asian descent comes from Neanderthals. That means our ancestors did not just replace Neanderthals, they interbred with them. Their descendants are us. Then came the discovery of another ancient cousin, found in a single cave in Siberia called Denisova. From a tiny finger bone and a few teeth, scientists sequenced the deoxyribonucleic acid of a previously unknown human group. They are now called Denisovans. Denisovan genes show up in some modern populations, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania. Some indigenous peoples of Papua New Guinea, Australia, and the Philippines carry several percent of Denisovan ancestry in their genomes. That is a substantial signal. Then came hints of a third ghost population. Genetic studies have suggested that some modern Africans carry traces of an unknown extinct hominin group. Not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, something else. So far, no fossil has been clearly tied to this ghost lineage. The evidence is in the patterns of deoxyribonucleic acid alone. In other words, our deep family tree includes mysterious relatives we have never met. Beings who were related to us, lived alongside us, exchanged genes with us, and then disappeared, leaving no clear bones behind. The implications are uncomfortable. It means modern humans interacted on intimate levels with other intelligent beings. They were not exactly the same as us. They had different skulls, possibly different bodies, possibly different behaviors. They may have had their own languages, their own religions, their own myths. What were those interactions like? Did they speak with each other? Trade, fight, marry, worship together? Were our ancestors afraid of them, or did they consider them kin? We can only guess, and the existence of a ghost lineage with no known fossils raises an even bigger question. What else is out there in the genes that we have not yet identified? Some researchers have proposed that pockets of isolated populations on Earth today might carry unique genetic anomalies. Certain communities in remote parts of the world have in some studies shown unusual genetic patterns. Some have particular adaptations to high altitude, like the Tibetans, who carry a gene variant suspected to come from Denisovans. Others have unusual immune system features, blood types, or metabolic traits that distinguish them from neighbors. Most of these anomalies are explained by simple isolation, genetic drift, and adaptation to local environments. There is no need to invoke aliens or lost civilizations. But it is worth pausing on the broader idea. Our species, our biology, our minds were shaped by a tangled history of mixing with other intelligent beings. Some of them we know about, others we suspect, some possibly we have not yet imagined. And on clay tablets buried in the desert, an even stranger memory may have been recorded by the people who first invented writing. In southern Iraq, in what was once Mesopotamia, archaeologists have uncovered tens of thousands of small clay tablets covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks. The writing system is called cuneiform. It was invented by the Sumerians, possibly the earliest fully literate civilization on Earth, around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. The tablets cover everything: tax records, recipes, love letters, royal proclamations, school exercises, astronomy, astrology, medicine, and myth. Among the myths are stories of gods who came down from the sky and shaped the destiny of humanity. In one of the most important Sumerian texts, often translated under names like the Atrahasis epic or the Enuma Elish, the gods create the world out of chaos. Later they create humans to do their work. The relationship is uneasy. The gods are powerful, capricious, and not always kind. The humans are small, fragile, and given to error. Then there are the figures known as the Anunnaki. According to the texts, they were a group of gods or divine beings who descended from the heavens to earth. They are described in different ways across different stories. Sometimes they sit in council, sometimes they fight among themselves, sometimes they bring great gifts, sometimes they punish. In the standard scholarly interpretation, the Anunnaki are simply the gods of Sumerian religion, similar in role to the gods of any other ancient pantheon. Their descent from the sky is symbolic, representing the connection between heaven and earth in religious thought. In a more alternative interpretation, the stories of the Anunnaki are taken almost literally. Some popular writers have argued that the Sumerian tablets describe real visitors from another world. According to this view, the descriptions of beings descending from the sky, manipulating human genetics, creating workers for mining operations, and giving knowledge of agriculture and writing are not metaphors but garbled memories of real events. This interpretation, often associated with authors like Zecharia Sitchin, is rejected by most mainstream scholars of Sumerian literature. They argue that the translations involved are loose, that the texts have been pulled out of context, and that the comparisons made with modern technology are unwarranted projections. These critiques are largely correct. Most extreme interpretations of the Sumerian tablets rely on selective reading and modern assumptions imposed on ancient writers. But the tablets themselves are remarkable. The Sumerians had a deep and detailed mythology of contact between humans and beings from the sky. They were not alone. Similar themes appear in the texts of many ancient cultures. The Egyptians spoke of gods who came down and walked among humans. The Greeks told of gods on Mount Olympus, mixing with mortals. The Hindus described divine beings descending into human history in different forms. The Chinese had emperors descended from celestial dragons. Indigenous traditions from Australia to the Americas tell of sky beings who shaped early humanity. The pattern is so widespread that one of two things must be true. Either all these cultures independently invented similar stories because the human mind is wired to imagine sky gods. Stars, the sun, the moon, the weather, all come from above. It is natural that ancient peoples would place their gods up there. Or there is some real event or some ongoing presence that has impressed itself on cultures across the world over thousands of years. Either way, the tablets at our feet, written in damp clay by hands that have been dust for millennia, are still talking. We can hear their words, we can try to understand, and whether we treat them as fables or as faded memory, they remind us how often our ancestors looked up at the sky and felt they were not alone. And while we have been looking up, the planet itself has been quietly doing something even stranger. Something that has erased entire eras of life before us. Beneath your feet, deep inside the planet, churns an ocean of liquid iron. It is hot enough to melt rock. It rotates slowly with the Earth. Currents within it generate an enormous magnetic field that surrounds the entire planet. We call this field the magnetosphere. It is invisible. We feel nothing of it. Yet without it, life as we know it would be impossible. The magnetosphere does many quiet jobs. It deflects most of the high-energy particles streaming from the sun. It protects the atmosphere from being slowly stripped away into space. It shields living things from a constant rain of cosmic radiation that, over millions of years, would damage cells, break deoxyribonucleic acid, and disrupt evolution itself. Right now, the magnetic field is roughly aligned with the spinning axis of Earth. Compasses point toward magnetic north, which is close to true north. But it has not always been that way. Geological evidence is clear. Many times in Earth's history, the magnetic field has flipped. North has become south. South has become north. These events are called geomagnetic reversals. We know about them because of how rocks remember magnetism. When molten rock at the seafloor or at volcanoes cools and hardens, certain minerals in the rock lock in the direction of the magnetic field at that moment. As new seafloor forms over millions of years, it creates a long-playing record of the planet's magnetic history. Reading those rocks reveals stripes of alternating polarity, marking the reversals. The pattern is irregular. Sometimes the field stays stable for millions of years. Sometimes it flips multiple times in a short span. The last full reversal happened about 770,000 years ago. We are, by some measures, overdue for another. During a flip, the field does not simply turn around overnight. It weakens significantly. It can become messy, with multiple magnetic poles wandering across the planet for thousands of years. Some parts of the surface may lose much of their magnetic shielding during this time. Solar radiation reaches the ground more easily. The atmosphere thins slightly. Cosmic rays penetrate deeper. Scientists are still working out exactly how dangerous a reversal is for life. Most evidence suggests that while a reversal is no fun, it is unlikely to cause a global mass extinction by itself. Life has continued through many reversals, but some researchers have proposed connections between weakened magnetic fields and certain extinction events. Periods of unusual climate change, changes in atmospheric composition, strange patterns in fossil records. The most dramatic claim is that a major reversal, combined with intense solar activity and other stresses, may have contributed to specific evolutionary turning points. Some scientists have suggested links, still debated, between magnetic field weakness and the extinction of certain species, including possibly some early human relatives. What is clear is this: the Earth is not a stable, peaceful machine. It is dynamic, restless, and capable of changing the conditions under which life exists. If a powerful civilization had risen on this planet 10 million years ago, then experienced a major magnetic flip, paired with intense climate change, paired with cosmic radiation events, what would have survived? Probably not their delicate paper records, not their electronics, not most of their cities. Stone monuments, possibly, but worn beyond recognition. In other words, when we ask if intelligent life could have come and gone on Earth before us, we have to take into account how thorough the planet itself has been at erasing the past. Magnetic reversals, ice ages, sea level changes, asteroid impacts, volcanic super eruptions, continental drift, all of them are tools of forgetting. And while the surface erases its memory, life still hides in places we rarely look, sometimes miles beneath our feet. Most life on Earth lives within a thin layer near the surface. Forests, oceans, soils a few yards deep, coral reefs, lakes and rivers, the world we see and walk through. But that is only the beginning. Deep beneath the surface, in cracks of rock, in pockets of water trapped between mineral grains, in superheated vents at the bottom of the sea, scientists have discovered an entire hidden biosphere. It is sometimes called the deep biosphere. The microbes living in it are not visible to the eye, but their total biomass may be staggering. Some estimates suggest that more living mass exists below the surface of the Earth than above it. These microbes live in conditions that defy ordinary expectations. Some thrive at temperatures above the boiling point of water at the surface, sustained by extreme pressure deep underground. Others survive on tiny amounts of energy released by radioactive decay of minerals, slowly nibbling at chemicals as they leak through cracks. Some live in total darkness, never having met sunlight in any way, possibly never even at the level of their ancient ancestors. Many of these organisms have been quietly surviving in the rock for unimaginable amounts of time. Studies have estimated that some deep microbes may have generation times so slow that they divide only once every 1,000 years. They are alive, but barely changing. Time means something different to them than to a mayfly or a human. Some of these life forms are so different from familiar species that scientists have had to create entirely new branches of the tree of life to describe them. Their proteins are unusual. Their metabolisms are unusual. Their genetic codes, while based on the same basic chemistry as all life on Earth, have evolved along strange paths. The deep biosphere reaches places we used to think were sterile. Inside igneous rock, formed from cooled magma, inside sediments far below the deepest ocean trenches, inside aquifers cut off from the surface for hundreds of millions of years. What this tells us is profound. Life on Earth is not just a thin layer of forests and fish. It is a deep, persistent, ancient presence that fills the planet itself. And that has implications for the bigger mystery. If complex life existed on Earth in ages we have largely forgotten, it could have lived in places we never look. Some researchers wonder whether unusual ecosystems in deep caves, in places like the Muvale Cave in Romania, are remnants of much older biospheres isolated for millions of years with their own evolutionary history. They have been studied and found to host species adapted to high levels of toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide, surviving without sunlight on chemical energy. Such places are like miniature alien worlds inside our own planet. If there are still entire ecosystems hidden in the deep earth, possibly very old, possibly very strange, what else might we still discover? Are there organisms that have witnessed events in Earth's deep history that we know nothing about? Are there ancient lineages of life that branched off from ours billions of years ago and continued in isolation? It is not impossible. The planet is enormous. We have explored only a tiny fraction of its underground. New extreme life forms are being discovered regularly. Each one reminds us that we share this world with creatures whose lives are slower, deeper, and more mysterious than we usually consider. And among all these layers of memory, hidden civilizations, lost cities, ancient artifacts, and deep biological worlds, one final question remains. If something was here before us and never really left, then where is it now? Hidden in the dust of forgotten ruins, sealed in stone, whispering in deoxyribonucleic acid? Or perhaps still here, in places we never quite look? After 32 chapters, walking through coal seams, deep caves, sunken ruins, ancient pyramids, lost cities, and strange fossils, a pattern emerges. The story of life on Earth is not one straight line. It is a tangle, a web, a forest of half-erased trails. Somewhere along those trails, things happened that we do not fully understand. Stones were shaped that should not have been shaped. Objects appeared in rock where they should not appear. Skulls grew into shapes that confuse experts. Civilizations rose and disappeared, leaving only scattered footprints. Maps showed coastlines that should have been invisible under ice. Tablets spoke of beings who descended from above. The mainstream view holds that all of this can be explained by natural processes, human ingenuity, and the unreliability of memory. Every artifact has a normal interpretation. Every legend has a symbolic meaning. Every coincidence has a mundane source. Most of the time, that explanation is right, but not all the time. And in the gaps, there is room for something stranger. What if certain places on Earth are quietly inhabited by remnants of older intelligence? Not in the dramatic, movie-style sense of monsters in caves, but in subtler ways. Microbial ecosystems that have learned and adapted in ways we do not yet measure. Genetic patterns in our own bodies inherited from beings we have not yet identified. Ancient structures still humming with vibrations we cannot explain. Stones still warming the soil above them after thousands of years. What if intelligence is not a single thing that arose once with us, but a recurring feature of this planet? Something that rises, falls, hides, and emerges again under different forms? In that view, modern humanity is just the current chapter. The previous chapters, half erased, would still leave faint marks. Some of those marks are exactly what we have been examining throughout this journey. There is no proof of any of this. No artifact yet recovered settles the question completely. No skull, no stone, no map closes the case. The evidence is suggestive, not conclusive. But that does not mean it is empty. Picture the next archaeologist who walks through a quiet forest, looking for something ordinary. A flake of stone, a fragment of pottery, a small bone. They are not expecting a miracle. They are simply doing careful work, layer by layer, in a single small site. Then their trowel hits something hard. They brush away the dirt. A shape begins to emerge from the soil. Maybe a face carved into stone. Maybe a piece of metal with grooves that should not be there. Maybe a bone in a layer where it should not be. Most of the time, the explanation will be normal. A modern object dropped by a tourist, a trick of geology, a misidentification. Once in a while, the explanation will not come. The object will refuse to fit. The trowel will have uncovered another small note from someone or something that walked here before. If you take only one thought from this journey, let it be this: the planet you live on is older, deeper, and more layered than you usually feel. Beneath your feet, in coal seams and limestone walls and deep underground rooms, sit clues from worlds you have never seen. They are quiet. They are stubborn. They have been waiting. Whatever was here before us was not a single thing. It was many. Some were ordinary peoples, swallowed by time. Some were strange creatures, swept away by extinction. Some may have been something else entirely, something for which we do not yet have a word. And the strangest part of the whole story is not that something was here before us. It is that in stones and bones and silent ruins and mysterious genes, parts of it never really left. You walk among them every day. You just have not learned yet to see them. Stay curious. Keep asking. Keep listening. The Earth remembers more than it shows.